TPN at technophilespodcast.com. I'm David Geisler, and this is the Technophiles Podcast.
We're no longer just humans. We are adapting technology and incorporating that into ourselves.
Yeah.
And that becomes an extension of us, post-human.
It's a special follow-up episode this week as the cast talks about updates to the relationship between Apple and the FBI, Scott Kelley's return to Earth, and Google's first fender-bender with a self-driving car. Get ready to test your boundaries of self because this is Technophiles' 289th episode. Hey everybody, welcome to tonight's show. I am joined with the regular cast, Vee Laabs, Krista-Lee Malone, and Jake Gill. Hey guys, how was your week? Any of you?
It's good.
Yep.
It's good, yeah.
Busy.
That's cool.
Yep, busy, fun. It was good.
Did you have a good time on your first live show as a cast member there, Jake, last week?
Yep, it was a good time.
I really enjoyed you being there.
Good to be back in the seat.
I enjoyed having you on the show. It was great. That was fun. We talked with Mark Tasman in our episode just before this. And it went great. And did you guys see the so you know how maybe you saw on our Twitter page, maybe you didn't, but at Works on my machine in New York made a TPN logo with his GPS running route.
Mm-hmm. What?
I saw that.
No.
Oh,
Okay, I saw the TPN thing.
this.
I didn't realize that it wasn't like you going for a run.
No, it wasn't. That was. If you look closely, there's like Empire State Building.
That is so cool.
I'll show you guys on break or something like that.
Excellent.
Maybe I'll pop it up right now on the video part.
That's awesome.
But
That's awesome.
I retweeted it.
You retweeted it?
I did.
It was cool. And then he
I
started
might have liked your retweet without actually looking. I saw the TPN thing, but I did not know. That's super cool.
And he said he even tried to keep. So the running app that he uses has the line does a heat map for how fast you're going. Mm-hmm. So he had to keep like a constant, whatever miles per hour to keep it in like the yellow zone.
So awesome.
It was so cool.
That is next level.
It was fantastic.
That is so sweet.
So anyway, here we are tonight. We have like a follow-up episode tonight. I'm really excited. There's a lot of things that happen in the news that are things that we have already talked about when they kind of first hit the news. Yeah. We're talking about the Google car, which finally, I'm saying like I wanted it to happen, finally got in an actual car accident.
Yeah.
And there's some details to that. Scott Kelley, I talked about Scott Kelley on the newscast a year ago. Mm-hmm. Well, he just got back from his big journey up there on the International Space Station. I know you're going to bring some information about that. Mm-hmm. Krista-Lee, you wanted us to talk, well, you said, hey, should we talk about the Apple thing that's happening in New York? We all said, yeah, absolutely. So this is definitely like a big follow-up episode. Nothing, well, a lot of new stuff, but stories that we've already chatted about. So I think tonight we're going to start with the Apple story because that's kind of the most time sensitive or whatever, right here in the beginning. And then we'll probably go to break and V talk about Scott Kelley. Yeah. Super excited about that. And then story C here, both Jake and I we both accidentally submitted Google car, so we'll just all talk about it.
Yeah.
We'll roll with it.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. Excellent. So for now, Krista-Lee, why don't you at least set up what happened for people who, this has been all over the news, but let's talk about our thoughts on the matter.
Okay. Well, just to connect it together, the last time we talked about Apple and the FBI, it was in regards to the San Bernardino terrorists.
And I think it was only 2 episodes ago, by the way.
Yeah, something like that. We're looking at only 2 or 3 weeks ago. And this article today, this is actually a different case, but they are connected because of the principle of legal precedence. So the case that was just ruled on in New York was the case of a drug dealer. But it was very similar in that the FBI was trying to say that they could use it's that Writs law, the All Writs Act, in order to compel Apple to help them break into this cell phone. Now, in this case in New York, the judge ruled that that law is not applicable in this case. Okay. And that's significant because the judge actually said in the ruling that this was not. He was ruling based on that law because that was the law the FBI was using, and so he wasn't necessarily saying there's no scenario in which Apple would have to act in this way, but he was saying this is not the law that's going to do it. It is not applicable. Right. But this is
which coincidentally is the one that they're trying to use in San Bernardino as well, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how those two connect, even though the actual crimes in both cases are not connected in
Right.
any way, shape, or form. The laws being used in order to get information are the same.
Yep.
And it's also with Apple. So that's kind of the information dump, if you want to call it that way. But why I really wanted to talk about this was because I found this absolutely fantastic article on slate.com. And it was written by Matthew Noah Smith of the University of Leeds. He's a professor in the program of philosophy, politics, and economics. And so this is really, it's a philosophical piece, but he talks all about how for a lot of philosophers, not just himself, the iPhone and other smart devices are an extension of the mind.
The title here is literally, an iPhone is an extension of the mind. And I'm going to even read the subtitle here. Again, it's Matthew Noah Smith. The FBI isn't asking to access an uncrackable safe. It wants to compromise the boundaries of the self.
Correct. And I thought this article was just absolutely fascinating. So this is what I really wanted to talk about. It's
That's
like,
fine.
here's that news thing, but
That's great.
this was absolutely fascinating. So in this article, he was talking about, and a lot of it's really, I don't know, kind of weird, I guess. But, he talks about, like, so let's say, for example, if you are counting to yourself and you're, like, under your breath saying 1, 2, 3, not really out loud like I am because we're recording, but.
You lost me. I'm joking.
Right, that you're verbally, the mental process of counting is now going outside of your physical brain because now you're using, your mouth, your tongue, your breath to assist that. By the same token, if you were doing hash marks on a piece of paper in order to help you calculate, that also becomes an extension of your brain. And that was, that's the simplistic examples he was using in the article, but it makes sense.
So he's trying to also say that obviously that's what's happening when we're using our phones?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And think about it, like, how, I know for me, like, the notes function, for example, like, there's all sorts of stuff in there that I would not really want anyone reading. Not even that they're even that important, but it's more like, I don't necessarily want anyone to know that I needed to put this on my phone to remember it.
Yeah.
Sure.
That does make a lot of sense, though, like using, like, the evolution of kind of representing your brain processes, that, like, this is stuff you can store in your brain, but you can also make it physical in sound or writing or even just typing something into a phone, that it's still part of your processes and something that is still very personal. It's not just property.
Right. So I don't know. What do you guys think?
I mean, the phone is an extension of the self, I think, is fair. That as soon as people start we actually made a quick joke about this on our live show last week, like the concept of a cyborg. And if we're already kind of, it depends on how far you want to take it. You could go all the way down to say, well, we started becoming cyborgs when we use calculators. We started becoming cyborgs when you use spell check. You could go real far, but
Yeah.
I think
I've heard it go even further to, like, the moment we put on clothes.
the moment we put on clothes, because we're going
Do
past
anything beyond that, we're going beyond the human
technology.
self and
Yeah.
augmenting ourselves. So I heard it described, actually, when I was an undergrad as, like, post-human. We're no longer
Yes.
just humans. We are adapting technology and incorporating that into ourselves.
Yeah.
And that becomes an extension of us.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
That was on my Twitter for a while, and then it was just, I was like, I'm done trying to have conversations in 144 characters about what posthumanism is, so forget it. But, I think that this is, I think the phone, it's the same kind of thing. We're taking information that we could probably keep in our brains. Maybe now we've been so trained to have this other stuff that, like, we can't even.
Yeah.
Right.
But we are kind of taking stuff and bits of knowledge, bits of information, and putting them. We're using the phone as an extension. It's like, an extra hard drive. We get that extra space, and we can access it whenever we want.
Yeah, and it's searchable.
Or when we have battery.
Yeah.
So one thing that I thought of And I tried Googling it. I couldn't find an answer. Not sure. Maybe a listener can tweet me later. But I thought of diaries.
Okay.
And maybe not all, but most of the arguments that I was reading in this Slate article, I think would also be relevant to a diary. And so then my question is, if someone wants to tweet me, is it legal to compel somebody to share their diary?
Well, I was thinking about that as you were talking about this. I was like, people can get warrants to search a place, and if they find a journal or something, I think that's okay, isn't it?
Yeah,
I think
that's
so.
Included. I mean,
if you get a warrant to search a house or something, I think that implies everything in sight.
In the house.
Yeah, you're searching it for anything
now,
relevant.
I guess what this comes down to is if that journal is in a safe with a key that's thrown away, now what happens? And you know what I mean? Like the literal safe now, not just the,
Yeah.
That's,
right.
I mean, if this case in New York, the phone wasn't locked at all, they probably go, okay, we got it in our warrant. Okay, found this.
Correct.
I think, right? And even in San Bernardino, the idea was just check its iCloud backup. You know what I mean? And they kind of botched that a little bit, but that was the original idea. And then fine, it's the same thing as I think it's the same thing as finding a journal on a shelf in a house after you get a warrant.
So real quick, just to clarify, because you mentioned about checking the iCloud backup, the shooter specifically turned off backup a few weeks before the shooting.
Right.
So, and that was one of the red flags with the FBI, because they're like, is that when he started actually sending?
He knew he was going to be doing this stuff, right?
When relevant things are going to happen.
Right, exactly. So it's not like the FBI didn't botch that. It was that this guy took the precaution.
Yeah, it was deliberate.
Thought ahead.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But there was still talk about, I mean, I don't want to get into, we don't need to be debating this necessarily, but like they could still have maybe at least pulled some information from that last update anyway. If they would have gone back, the idea was if they brought the phone back to the original network and just plugged it in, it would automatically in the background
sync everything.
Oh, that's what it was. That's what it was. And Tim Cook said this in an interview with like ABC News or something like this. Mm-hmm. If they would have the first thing Apple thought for the FBI to do was to take the phone, still locked, but just bring it back to the network so that it auto connects to the network, plug it in and let it sit there for a day, and it would in the background do all of its little iCloud backup stuff.
Yeah.
Now, was it turned off or did it just stop? That's true. I'm not sure. That's a good point.
I think from what I read, the shooter turned it off. Yeah, the shooter disabled it, but it was significant. Yeah, actually, it was because it had not been disabled for the entire time the shooter owned the phone.
Right.
Yeah. It was specifically disabled at a certain time that was a few weeks before the shooting.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so that was the problem because the FBI could access older stuff, but then they could see.
Well, theoretically they could. They can't access anything right now. Like even that iCloud backup.
Well, they must have accessed something in order to know that at that point that it had been turned off.
So the last thing, well, you're right.
They
I don't know.
They can probably look at his.
There's a log of maybe the last time the backup happened,
yeah.
right? That's what they see. They being Apple or the FBI, probably Apple. Maybe it's AT&T.
I mean, it could be on like a computer they confiscated as well.
That's true.
True.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's true.
We don't have all the info, but I think that the interesting thing about the article that Krista-Lee brought though today is that. The argument that this person is making is that, like, this is so not a journal, right? It's not a diary. This is, if it's the extension of the mind, and maybe it's interesting and difficult to do because, like, there is so much utility in phones as well that isn't a part of this, like, memory or these neurological processes that we're doing. So is, like, part of the iPhone our mind and the other part is just a tool we use, or?
Yeah.
Is it both?
Well, I think it is. There's, like people using, I love GPS. I use it all the time. I'm kind of a map geek as it is. But, the big threat is that the whatever the gland is in our brain that helps us with direction and stuff like that, they see that part's actually getting smaller with people now as more and more GPS. It's not being worked out. It's not being trained as much, So, like, could we say that those functions are decreasing in our brain because they're increasing on the iPhone, and that's kind of a passive thing. We're not entering data into a journal. We're not just storing things necessarily on the phone.
Yeah.
It's passively taking over tasks for us, and I think that's where you're going with this, Jake, and the article.
Yep.
It's doing some of the heavy lifting.
And so, yeah, of course, half of it, pardon me, is our mind. I mean, I think so, absolutely. If you're looking at this from a technical point of view, I don't know what it means legally or whatever.
Yeah.
And okay, so another thing I wonder, and I guess this would be different, but there are circumstances under which legally law enforcement can do cavity searches, and that to me seems
pretty invasive.
Yeah.
So that would be like, what if you had software on the local drive of your phone? That's different than but I mean, that's just guys. It's invasive, but it's transportation. Like it's different. I think that's different. I don't know. Is it like a DNA? Is it more like a DNA test or something, or is it more like?
But they can do that too,
right?
Well, yeah, that's true. I mean, DNA.
So
maybe that's a better example, because a cavity search, while invasive and I'm imagining uncomfortable, you don't get the same level of information that you do with a DNA test. Now, a DNA test is like that is.
I'm trying to think of something that they can search that an individual creates passively, and I'm not saying that they create the DNA, but you see where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
DNA is not even the best example either. We're gonna like get all twisted up in a bunch of different metaphors here. However.
But it's the privacy question of who you are, right? Which is why I thought DNA wasn't necessarily a bad idea.
Oh, I see.
That also brings like the really good argument of the FBI, like not letting the FBI have this backdoor into everybody's minds,
right?
Or the extension of their minds, where that's like a serious invasion of privacy,
right?
I mean, have that be available.
Yeah, if you have a backdoor into your mind, there is no privacy.
No,
none. That is it. It is over.
And for the sake of this conversation, we are putting our portions of our minds and portions of our functioning, and then even the and the abstractions of those, the things that are actually the tasks that the phones are doing for us, even passively, then create an abstraction of our mind and our self, which is being represented there on the phone. Yes, of course.
Or it's aiding in something. Like in the article, they're talking about kind of brain-based knowledge of a city and Google Maps. Like, obviously, it's not just Google Maps getting you somewhere if you're using GPS. You could be familiar, or there could be very large gaps of the process of going to point A from point A to point B, where you're just going on your own and you're using your brain power,
right.
But then Google is going to chime in for those little bits of things.
Right.
And that, I think, is the interesting thing of like, this is where the mental stuff steps outside of the mental into the world we interact with. And so what do we do with that? Like, what is the legality of how you interact with that stuff?
Well, I think Apple, and I think probably other phone companies, and even Google, as much as we joke about them trying to sell you sweaters every 5 seconds, I think they get that, and that's why there's so much data, at least on iPhones, that like Apple doesn't even care to know. A lot of this stuff that's being processed. Yes, there's also stuff that can become aggregate data. They can, like one of the ways that Apple Maps knows if traffic is fast or slow is, of course, the normal database that the whole, there's sensors in highways and cameras that take that, that's part of the database. But they also use, and we talked about this on the show a year or two ago, they do use an aggregate of all the iPhones. So like even the other day, Krista-Lee, you and I were driving down to the Milwaukee Public Museum to meet with our guests for our next live show. But we had the GPS running, even though we knew how to get there. But there was like, well, once we get down there, we had to take a change. What's the quickest way? There might be something, but I run that all the time. I even said to you when we were driving there, I was like, I don't know. I always run my GPS because sometimes there's that moment where you do know where you're going, but then there's a car accident or there's construction or you take a right turn and you just want to be able to get back on your route as quick, to reroute you. The rerouting thing is really nice, That's and so like 90% of the time, even if I'm running the GPS and I'm using myself as an example, I'm sure this is true with almost everybody, it is your own brain processing. But then there's those times when it takes over for you.
Quick reference check.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this is a little tangential, but because it just happened to me yesterday, it's like on my brain. But with the idea also with passive processes, because you brought that up a few minutes ago. So I just randomly like updated apps on my phone, which one, I don't do automatically. So two, every time it does, it's because there's like 50 updates because I haven't done it, right?
So weird.
And so I think it was
you're like living in 2011.
I know,
it's
right?
just crazy.
So it wasn't they don't call it Foursquare anymore, but the thing that Swarm, that's what they call it now.
Well, Foursquare still exists, but Swarm, yeah.
But then the Swarm is that additional whatever. So that updated, and there was all these like red notifications, which I'd previously had turned off, which is why all of a sudden the little red circle came up with like 50 different things in there. And so I opened it up, and I thought I had actually gotten rid of this app, but apparently I didn't. And so I went through, and all of a sudden I had this history of like all these places I'd supposedly been. About half of them I'd never been. It was like places next door to where I was, or it was places that I passed on my way to somewhere
just
else.
That nearest marker when it couldn't find one.
So what happens, what Swarm does is when you go to a location, it'll say, are you here right now? Trying to, promote a check-in. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering if somehow
it's just pinging everywhere that has like a check-in spot.
Right.
Because you have like...
And so she maybe had this thing running. So you didn't have the app running in the background. You deleted the app, best you could tell. But I wonder if the app goes in and then backlogs your GPS data or something.
Well, I think I thought I had disabled the app. Like I tend to, I could be a little bit of a hoarder on my phone.
So you didn't delete it.
So I didn't.
Oh, well then it's definitely working in the background.
I tend to just disable them. I thought it had been disabled. Obviously it wasn't. But I mean, one of these things in particular, I figured it out after a couple of minutes. It's a cousin's that I pass on my way to the studio.
Sure.
And it's pinging. I am not even stopping. I mean, it is at an intersection, so I don't know, maybe it's pinging every time I hit the red light.
Yeah.
Right.
Or something, right? But like there's like a gas station and something else.
And you stopped there for a certain amount of time. No, were the notifications asking you, did you go here? Or we thought you were here. Want to check in here? Or was it saying you were here?
It was, here's your history of everywhere you've been in like weeks, because I haven't looked at the app.
Sure.
And there is an option where I can slide right, and then it will say, were you actually here?
Yeah. There you go.
But then, of course, I'm just curating this little history of myself, right? And this was, but in the meantime, like if I had never...
Only the cool places, though, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, like the cousins.
Like the cousins that I've never been to.
Cool.
Every day.
So
Can you still be the mayor on Swarm, or...
I don't even know.
I deleted Swarm a few years ago, but when I used Swarm for about a year when they switched over, and they still had the mayor stuff happening and everything.
I've never even heard of
Yeah,
Swarm.
I was the mayor of Happy...
Only Foursquare.
I was the mayor of Happy Family
Swarm
forever.
Is Foursquare.
Nice. There you
Remarketed. Foursquare rebranded and tried to become more like a Yelp, but they wanted to keep the Foursquare experience happening, and then they rebranded that as Swarm.
Okay, so here in my head was the connection here, not just me bitching about what happened yesterday.
I see where you're going with this.
So let's say this becomes accepted that it is an extension of the mind, right? Mm-hmm. And let's just say, I don't know, for whatever reason, the FBI is going to look at my phone. They're going to sit there and be like, oh, well, she was at this place at blah, blah, blah time because Swarm says she was.
Or at least you're in the vicinity because you were.
True. Okay, so that's true, except for the cousin sub. I'm like positive the only way that's pinging is because I'm driving past on my way to the studio.
Right.
Okay, so what if you actually go in and say I was there, even though you weren't there? Then which is...
You mean you almost like take advantage of it as an
alibi?
God.
Yeah.
You're lying with your extension mind.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa, that gets tricky.
Oh,
we're getting tight on time here, guys. We gotta get going, but that's tricky.
I mean, there's a lot to discuss here.
Right, yeah.
I don't even think that the article necessarily tries to kind of answer the question of like what the heck Apple and FBI and things are supposed to do. But I think they are repurposing the question and saying, look, if we look at this philosophically, then there definitely is something interesting that happens when we engage with technology in this way, where our mind has an extension and we get access to additional things, and how we engage in those things is a really interesting point of discussion, basically.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right, let's get out of here. This is part 1. We're going to be coming back in part 2 to talk all about Scott Kelley coming back to Earth.
Yeah.
I'm excited to chat about that as well. So we'll be back after the break. Schrodinger's. I'm a little nervous with him being on the computer like this, but we'll just see how this goes.
It looks cozy.
V, until that time, if people are gonna, while they're clicking next video on YouTube right now, if they want to tweet you while they do that, they can do that.
They can do that at bear_Annika.
Fantastic. Krista-Lee, if people want to talk about extensions of the mind with you, they can tweet you.
At GamerAnthro, and actually I will continue to dig up the diary thing, and if I find anything, I will put it out on my Twitter.
Cool.
I wish there was a way to you'll put it on your Twitter? Okay, that's fine. That'll work. Yep. Excellent. Jake, where can people find you then?
They can find me on Twitter at Critical Owl.
Marvelous. Okay, we'll be right back. We'll see you in the next video.
David, wait, where can they find you?
Oh gosh, thank you. I actually forgot.
Where are you, David?
Well, sometimes, now that we do these 3 parts, I think that's always at the end and I forget in the middle.
Sure.
But we love it when people tweet the show at Technophiles Pod. They can find us on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, and Facebook by searching Technophiles Podcast, or they can go to our actual website, technophilespodcast.com, and people can find me on Twitter at Rapture Paint. Cool. See you guys in part 2.